know what we're doing. Things are about to change, it's evolution. Wait to shake the ground, you feel it moving. We're the revolution.
Travel far from where you are. Fly from Leeds Bradford Airport with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. If distance were no object, what would you do?
We'd go back to Hong Kong, to where we honeymooned.
Dim sum for breakfast? Oh, sign me up.
Rio for us. We'll take a samba class and samba on down to Pedro de Sal.
Travel far from where you are. Fly from Leeds Bradford Airport via Amsterdam with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. Visit klm.co.uk.
Good evening and welcome everybody, this is Obi-Wan Pez for Simplex Pachinko. We are going to be doing some more Peter Liljedahl's Building Thinking Classrooms tonight. So, if anyone is interested in getting that book either for yourself because you are an educator, or getting the book for a friend who is an educator, there is the link there to corwin.com where you can purchase said book. I really don't recommend this for anybody who isn't an educator or isn't buying it for an educator, unless you're really into educational policy. Not even policy, just, educational methods. Anyway, not recommended just because it is fairly highly technical and, it's very interesting, but at the same time, if you're not actually an educator yourself or buying it for an educator, it's not really for you. So, I hope you all are having a good start to your week. It is... what day is it? It's Monday night. Um, as a note, I did change the stream title for the previous one to let this be a PSA. Don't stream while exhausted. Yeah, I will not be releasing last Wednesday's stream on YouTube. It was, I don't know, kind of embarrassing, I guess. I was just so exhausted, and I hadn't, like, taken a little nap or something, and coffee was not doing it. So, there were some rambles, which ended up bordering on sounding drunk. I was not drunk. I was just very tired. So we're going to be eliminating that particular stream. Let it expire on Twitch. So all right. So for building thinking classrooms, where we are so far, we have completed chapters 1 through 10 of 14, and I think the 15th chapter is how to bring it all together. Yeah, 15th chapter is how to bring it all together. So we're coming up pretty close to the end of our series on building thinking classrooms, and then from there I'm going to have to start reading some of the other books that I have on my shelf and rereading them and seeing what might be a good book to use next. We probably will go maybe 1 or 2 chapters at a time, depending on what book it is and what it is that we're looking at in terms of educational practices. We'll also be thinking a little bit about more modern educational practices, if there are any particular ideas in those books which are maybe a little outdated. So we'll see how it goes. Today is the 6th. So the last one we did... would have been probably on the 1st. Let's just double check this screenshot to make sure that this is that and not just something from like Elite Dangerous or whatever. Very possible. Okay, screenshot from... No, because I moved it and renamed it. Cool. Building thinking classrooms. The last one we had was BTC 10 consolidation. Cool. Okay, so going through our previous, we're going to... Can I just crop this? Yes, I can. Excellent. Okay. We'll go there. And sure. Yep. Press enter or... Okay, there we go. Cool. Hey, Zach. Yes, I am citing myself. Because that was my work, if you will. My coining of a phrase, which is not particularly difficult. Okay. So, as for what we have done so far for building thinking classrooms, we have that we are trying to optimize the classroom space by breaking institutional norms. So basically, Peter Liljedahl figured out that essentially anything that you're doing currently in a classroom is going to be less effective than doing the exact opposite of that thing. Mostly because we're just trying to keep the students off balance and never able to start sitting comfortably in a place where they're like, oh, well, it's just another math class. I can slack off and somebody else will do the work for me. So, step one was to introduce non-curricular thinking tasks and then eventually start working into curricular thinking tasks. So the initial type of stuff is, for instance, if we have a square that has 3 lines going to 3 of the corners of the square with lengths 3, 4, and 5, what are all of the possible lengths of the side of the square such that point P is within the square? And I think that that is a requirement. That it is, in fact, inside of the square. I should probably look at that again. That's also an interesting question. Is it possible that you could go outside of the square? Ah. It appears that another student had, in fact, moved it outside the square and found another location. Okay. So, anyway, a non-curricular thinking task like this, some sort of puzzle, is enticing to students to try and get them involved in just doing some math or critical thinking, which is not particularly, or not at all related to doing curriculum, at least at first. And then once students have gotten the swing of things, again, he said, like, doing it for 1 or 2 weeks is going to get them into the habit of doing non-curricular thinking tasks and start thinking about things, specifically mathematics. It's only after those 2 weeks we start changing into curricular thinking tasks as like the second activity in the day. So instead of doing non-curricular thinking tasks all day, now it's just one at the beginning and then hop into curricular thinking tasks. In order to do this, we form visibly random groups of 3. So for instance, if you were to grab a pack of cards and start setting out 3 ranks at a time, or 3 of each rank at a time, and then shuffle all of them together for the number of students you are expecting that day. And always end up making it a multiple of 3. So at the beginning, have a multiple of 3, the next multiple of 3 after the number of students you are expecting to come, randomize those, and then have the students pick a card, any card, and have those locations around the room clearly labeled so that those people can go there and then start their work once their group gets there, or basically as soon as you feel able to start. Have the students work standing as they are able at vertical non-permanent surfaces. So these are, generally speaking, whiteboards that have been tacked on the wall, or glass also works if they're able to write on glass. I did find some challenges, as I said, in episode 3 here, where writing on the glass wall that goes to outside, i.e. the windows, presented a challenge for the cleaning crew because they saw what, residue was left over if students hadn't cleaned it properly, or even if they had, there was, some smudging and stuff like that, and they got a little upset with me. It was also very difficult to read from a distance what people were writing on the windows if it wasn't in like a very contrasting color to the scenery behind it. And even then, it was really hard to just stand there and see the work that was done on the windows. I actually had to move a little bit in order to see what was, parallaxing, not moving relative to the window. Limit the amount of furniture you have. The students need to be standing around the edge of the room, again, as able, and you need to defront the classroom. So do not have a specific front. That should be essentially, again, if there is a front where the teacher's desk is, you should be somewhere else pretty much the entire time. And also, again, don't let the students, be able to say, oh, you're always here at any particular point. 5, answer only keep thinking questions. So don't answer any questions that allow the students to stop thinking. So do not answer things like, are we right? Is this the correct method? Are we, going down a wrong path or whatever? You want the students to go down a couple of wrong paths occasionally, and most of the time, using the Socratic method is just chef's kiss, primo perfect for this particular scenario. All you need to do is basically start asking them questions back and ask, what do you think? Or show me where, show me what your thinking is. Explain this to me. What's going on here? And most of the time, they will answer their own questions. Give tasks clustered immediately around you, standing as able, verbally only, and within the first 5 minutes of addressing the class as a whole. This ensures that the students have the best chance of not wandering off mentally, and also by doing it verbally only. We've discussed this before. What if students have processing issues with, verbal, I don't want to say commands, but, with verbal information? And Peter's answer to this is essentially, look, if they've got processing issues with verbal information, they probably have processing issues with every other type of information anyway. And this is going to be a skill that over time they're going to start developing. So even somebody with processing issues will be able to start building up this skill better. And the point of verbally only is that this is going to cause students to have to refer to each other or to other groups in order to determine what's the correct way to interpret the following question or the previous question. Right? Reframe homework as check your understanding exercises, because homework decides for students where and when it is appropriate to work on, whereas check your understanding exercises are for the student's benefit and for checking their understanding. as it says on the tin. You don't want students to start thinking that, like homework, they're doing this for you and for a grade. So, as such, these check your understanding exercises should not be graded. Answers should be provided immediately, and solutions fully worked out should be provided after 1 to 3 days. And again, this provides the greatest opportunity for students to actually do it. The second you start grading it, it is for a grade, and it is for you. They are doing it for you. So, you need to abandon basically all of that thinking and start saying to yourself, okay, it's not going to be graded. The answers are provided immediately, so students will be able to check their understanding, and it is for them to check themselves. He said that something like 25% of the students had actually worked on it when it was just regular homework, and 25% of students didn't work on it when it was check your understanding exercises. So he went basically full compliment on that, and pretty good. We foster student understanding or student autonomy by redirecting them. So rather than being the source of information, you are a router. Let yourself be a router. Take the student who has a question and ask them if they've talked with that group over there, who probably have the answer to their question. Use hints to stave off frustration and engage their perseverance, and use extensions to stave off boredom and engage their patience with any particular problem. So you need to come up with, and this is going to be different for every single lesson, this is going to be different for every single student. You just decide what hints you're going to allow a particular group to have in order to make sure that they aren't stalling and running into issues. And again, give extensions to students who are already done. Those extensions could be as simple as explain that to this other group, or it could be something to the effect of here's something else you can think about. You know, one of my favorites in quadratic equations is like, what if the first number isn't 1? Okay, and then chapter 10, what we worked on last week, is to consolidate the lesson. So here we're discussing reification, making concrete something that is abstract. So they're starting to see the lesson itself as less abstract, and then we need to make sure that we bring that all together so that it is concrete within the student's head. We typically have the leveling to the top method, where everybody is just basically going over the problems at the top level and then expecting everybody to be lifted up or to catch up with the people who are at the absolute top of the group. Whereas if we use the leveling to the bottom, or as I termed it, sweeping from the bottom method, then what's happening is you're going over the problems that everybody understands, but you're trying to get everybody to understand it in a similar or same way. And so that is going to be a bit different from what most people are used to. Again, what most people are used to is the leveling to the top and insisting that everybody understands something to the highest level. So in sweeping from the bottom, we go over the simplest problems in maybe a different way, or we discuss them so that everybody understands, and then we start collecting all these students as we come up higher and higher and higher levels. The consolidation needs to be by other students, so we are not running through the entire thing. We're basically going through and the best, again, there were 3 kind of methods that went with it. One, right. So the first one, yay. Here we go. The first one was the teacher leads a general discussion about the task and solutions, but writes nothing down. So this is talking about a very general, broad idea that is not going to really benefit from being written down. What is it that we're discussing in terms of, like, when we saw, you know, some of these things that were happening in the quadratic formula, or not the quadratic formula, when we saw the factorization of these particular polynomials, you know, how did we go through and determine what the signs of the factors would be, right? That's a good question that we could use for this stage 1. Something that we don't write down, we just discuss it generally. We're mostly working off of student input, and again, Socratic method works absolutely beautifully in this particular setup. Number 2, teacher leads a detailed discussion of the task and records on the board what is being discussed. So in the same way, we could then discuss a particular example of what we saw. We could also then discuss, like, a particular example of a quadratic equation that has, like, a not equal to 1 and some other stuff going on in it. We could discuss, just real quick, you know, all of these individual bits. What are the things that are important? I would typically, like, circle the signs that are in between and write a little note next to each one that says, what is it that this tells us? What information is it giving us? So in my case, the sign in front of the constant is telling us whether the signs are same or different. And the sign in the middle is telling us which is the bigger, or, yeah, which sign, what is the sign of the bigger number? There we go. It's been a while since I've been in a classroom. And the third is the teacher leads a detailed discussion of the task and the solutions using student work. So all of this could be done, right? The discussion of the signs, the discussion of what it all means, the discussion of how we can go through each individual step can all be done on students' boards, and the work is all around you. So we had discussed that you want to circle, box off, whatever, ask the students to recopy important bits and put them in a box. And you can walk around the room, again, intentionally, as long as possible, walking around the room in a crazy pattern in order to make sure that the students stay awake and aren't going to start drifting mentally. And also, you mix them up a little bit just by walking around. Rather than walking all around, you walk in this weird star pattern. It's going to start getting them a little more mixed up. And then that way you could say, somebody who is not in this group, explain to me what's going on. And when we do that, it ends up that the students pay more attention. The students have to work in their heads what's going on that board. And again, most students are going to try and decipher this particular thing because they were interested in what they had. And now they're going to be interested in what these students have because now it's different. How is it different? Why is he going over this one now? Why is why did they have this particular thing? It's different from the way we did it. Why is it different? How is it different? So students have to figure all that stuff out, and that's what helps them understand all of these individual little nuances. Okay. So, because I didn't have to rewrite all of that like I did last week, we're only at the 33-ish minute mark, so that's pretty awesome. Alright, so chapter 11. Is all about taking notes, as you all have seen from the title of this particular section. So, once again, the typical way that we do this is I'm going to read directly out of the book and offer my individual take on things that we have tried, we have done. I will not necessarily read word for word, and I will not necessarily read literally everything, but I will I will go over all of the relevant salient points and make some commentary as we go. So,
If an absolute or a howler from the keeper has put you in front, don't let a lively winger on a mazy run spoil your bet. Just freeze a winning score and win a leg of your ACCA early with Sky Bet ACCA Freeze. Sky Bet, for the fans. Minimum 5 selections. Pre-match football only. Full-time result market only. Max stake £20. Max 3 freezes per week. Eligibility restrictions. Teams apply. 18 plus. Gambleaware.org.
That was not comfortable. Okay. So, Peter says, having students take notes is one of the most enduring institutional norms that permeate mathematics classrooms all across the world. In my visits to the original 40 classrooms, I witnessed students taking notes in all 23 high school classrooms and more than half of the 17 elementary level classrooms. Naturally, if they're younger, they're typically not taking notes. But even as early as grade 4, I can remember taking notes in my classes. Probably even grade 3 to some extent. I know I did at least a little bit. I don't think I really took notes in second grade. This was a different school, but nonetheless, I don't think that we did much in the way of notes. It was more activities. In this chapter, you'll see the results of the research that looks at the normative practice of note-taking through the lens of thinking, and then learn about the alternative method for having students take notes that makes it a thinking activity that is relevant for students in grades 3 through 12. Okay, the issue. When I observe students taking notes in those original 40 classrooms, they are most often in the form of what Peter calls I write, you write notes. This is where, I'm sure you all are familiar with it, the classroom teacher writes notes on the board, the students write it down, word for word, symbol for symbol, what the teacher has written. These notes are usually a combination of definitions and worked examples that are accompanied by the teacher's verbal explanations as they write. Occasionally, classroom teachers take the form of fill-in-the-blank notes. Goodness. Where students are provided with mostly completed notes and are asked to fill in missing pieces while the teacher writes on the board. I was working on a promotion project. Which was in trying to create some project-based learning packets. And the project-based learning packets that I was working on were basically of the form of my actual narrative that I would normally give in a classroom was then given to the students in basically a paragraph form with stuff filled in, or stuff interjected throughout. And it was sort of a precursor to my understanding of how building thinking classrooms works. It this was all way before I even knew that BTC existed. So the idea was that I would give the students this packet. We'd say, okay, work on this particular page or set of pages today. And I would like go around between the groups and discuss with them like what's going on with it. It had some similarities to building thinking classrooms in that like the students weren't given the answers. It was kind of like I was using my narrative, which again is mostly Socratic style. So it was asking them a bunch of leading questions, which got from point A to point B. And then led them through C, D, E, F, and G in the next, 20 minutes or whatever. And the students were supposed to, for instance, follow the narrative that goes from, how do we start discussing trigonometry. So my initial discussion in trigonometry, I've done it here on this channel before, is basically, what are the first things that you create in geometry? Well, you can create points. If you have enough points, then you can create a line. If you have enough lines, then you can create an angle. And then multiple angles can get you some sort of polygon. And if we start with a circle and then draw in an angle, right, where would it be convenient for that angle to be drawn? Well, it would be convenient to draw the vertex at the origin. And then where would it be convenient to draw the initial and terminal sides of that angle? Well, we said, if we want to standardize all of this stuff, cool, we'll put the The students could come up with their own reasoning and things like that, but then we come back together and say that, the standardization of this whole thing is that we're going to use the positive x-axis as the initial side no matter what, and we're always going to open up in the positive direction, which is going to be the counterclockwise direction, which then goes through the first, second, third, and fourth quadrants. And that's why they're numbered in that weird kind of way, where it goes counterclockwise instead of left to right, top to bottom. Okay. Back to Peter. Given that in many circumstances more than half the lesson was dedicated to this particular activity, i.e. taking notes, it must be an important and worthwhile endeavor. When I interviewed teachers about this, the two most common reasons teachers gave for having students write notes were, 1, it created a record for them to look back at in the future, and 2, it was a way for them to learn. Although using notes as a record was suggested almost exclusively by high school teachers, using notes as a form of learning was supported by teachers from grades 3 through 12. If writing notes is a way to enhance learning, and if thinking is a necessary precursor to learning, then students taking notes must be a thinking activity, or must be converted to a thinking activity. Right? So it must be a thinking activity in order to support the student learning in this building thinking classrooms model. The issue, or the problem, to test whether students taking notes is indeed a thinking activity, we documented the various studenting behaviors exhibited during I Write, You Write note-taking in 10 different classrooms, grades 6 through 12. Liljedahl, Allen, 2013, discussing the broader or specific method that was used. All right, just for fun here. Liljedahl, Allen, 2013, studenting the case of homework. So if anybody is interested in looking that up, that was in Proceedings of the 35th Conference for Psychology of Mathematics Education, North American Chapter, Chicago, Illinois. So if anybody's interested, it's there. as well as fill-in-the-blank note-taking in 3 classes, grades 9, 10, and 11. We also distributed a 1-question survey to all students in all 13 classes, all grades, etc., and conducted short interviews with 150 selected students. In the 10 I Write, You Write classrooms, 14% of students did not take notes at all. Most commonly, they said, because it was difficult to take notes and listen at the same time. Which, fair, especially if you are not practiced at it. So, in the honors classes, I'm sure that a lot of the students were able to get over this just because they'd been doing it longer. Some said they never looked at the notes anyway, so why bother?
Travel far from where you are. Flying from Leeds Bradford Airport with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. If distance were no object, what would you do?
Hey Don, how's it going? Hey everybody, it's Don Factorial. Welcome on in. Hope you're having a good Monday.
Travel far from where you are. Flying from Leeds Bradford Airport via Amsterdam with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. Visit klm.co.uk.
Yeah, we're doing all right. Started a bit late tonight, but yeah, we had a little tiff going on in the house, so it was kind of like, okay, let's get that taken care of before we actually go live. Yep, others said that they forgot their pencil, notebook, whatever, which he said they took as proxies for "I don't want to." Which, like, maybe that's not 100% fair or 100% true, but at the same time, like, if you've been forgetting your pencil and been forgetting your notebook, like, a lot, then it's probably because you just don't feel like it. So, seems reasonable, at least for some of the students. Now, they probably did not break that out, or they were reasonably confident that that's really what those particular students meant. Of the students who did take notes, we noticed that more than half were not keeping up. So why is this significant? To answer this, I need to differentiate between what we call live notes and dead notes. Live notes are the product of real-time generation of notes by the teacher. where the teacher is usually working through an example, demonstrating the sequence of how something is to be done, and providing a narrative as the work unfolds. So, examples. Demonstrating a skill-based sequence of actions, whatever you want to call it. And providing a verbal narrative. Whereas live notes are a chronologically linear process, they often are spatially nonlinear. So they will take up they're going to take up who would do nonlinear notes? I mean, it's just like right? You've got stuff that's like arrowed off and starts talking about this other thing, and we go off on a tangent over here, right? I do it all the time. This is the kind of thing that, live notes is something more like what we've got going on right here. Not entirely, but at least somewhat. Okay, whereas, notes are not necessarily appearing on the board in a strictly top-to-bottom, left-to-right fashion. Much of mathematics is, by its nature, nonlinear when you start, again, talking about keeping little notes and let's see. I don't think I really have a whole lot in here, but yeah, when I was talking about the trying to create notes for the generalized mean value theorem, right? I started up here, I started writing across this way, and then I jumped over to this side over here. If g prime is non-zero, we do this. Oh, h prime is equal to this stuff, we like expand it all out. We do an epsilon delta proof over here. We got this thing where if we have a limit where x is going to a finite value, the limit is going to infinity, then we want this thing where n is going to be greater than 0, or nope, absolute value of f of x is going to be greater than n, some really big number, and then we jump around all over the place to make all this stuff. L'Hopital's rule here at the bottom. Like, a lot of it, for me at least, is fairly linear because I am practiced. I've been doing mathematics in this particular fashion for, 30 years at this point, pretty much. So a lot of my notes end up being much more linear than a student's would be, and then a and than they would be if I were running a class. If I'm running a class, I'm literally all over the place. In fact, let me pull up an example. Let me find an example. Yes, perfect. I am just going to grab one. Yup. That is perfect. Let me make sure it doesn't have any identifying information. Now we're good. Alright, downloads. Evaluating limits. Here you go. These are live notes from one of my Calculus 1 classes. So, as you can see from it, right? Woodcraft, I'll get right back to you. Let me know when you're back. I'll say it again later. Alright, this is from 2022, I think. So before I had done how the conveyor belt's always look and said, look. I know you're not just calling me out, but at the same time, I feel called out. Okay, so the top left here, I had said, okay, what we're looking at is we have this function that is real valued. So we're going from a real number to a real number. It's a mapping. So complex non-real solutions may be ignored. We don't have to use them at all. Yeah, conveyor spaghetti. Yeah. Over here, right, I said that, well, in some cases, we do end up finding that, you know, man, this was a particular cubic function that had a real solution and then two imaginary solutions which exist at these particular locations. Okay, these are how imaginary numbers kind of fit into all of this stuff. That's really weird, isn't it? In complex analysis, I mentioned that, oh, by the way, those of you who go to like master's level, you may end up finding that you have this weird function with this area underneath it that you're supposed to find, but it's impossible to do it in the XY plane because reasons. Because for the most part, right, our real valued functions do not always have reasonable integrals. So we won't necessarily be able to find the area under a curve. But if you were to translate this into the complex plane, oftentimes what happens is that this ends up working into the real imaginary plane into a nice form, whether that be, in this case, a semicircle, or maybe like a triangle, or maybe all sorts of other stuff, in which case we can just say, oh, by the way, this has this area. In the case of a semicircle, right, 1/2 pi r squared. And then we translate it back to the real numbers, and it does something with that. And now it's just a number. And it's like, what just happened here? We do all sorts of stuff like that. It's awesome. I love complex analysis. I know Penn and Dawn had done some of that stuff earlier, so definitely check that out. Woodcraft, you back? Alright, so then we were talking about limits. And we were saying here, we want to know what the limit as x approaches the cube root of 7/3 of this f of x value. Doing the homework right now. Awesome. So we figure out what that c value is, right? The cube root of 7/3. It's about 1.32635524, etc. Let's just suggest that this particular thing does not exist, right? The values are going to two different values in this particular function. I don't know if I... Yeah. I just said that as we're coming from the left and the right, they're going to be two different values. So I just made up this function, right? And we say that as x starts getting closer and closer to that value, then from the negative direction, then our f of x values become larger and larger in the negative direction. as our x values start approaching it from the positive direction, then our f of x values start approaching positive infinity. Right, so how exactly does this all work? We've got all sorts of different kinds of limits that we can work with. And again, here, if we have a limit of f of x and a limit of g of x, then we can do some sort of linear combination of these things, and it's going to end up coming out to be the exact same thing as, yeah, it's just going to be a linear combination of the values that we found up at the top. And so we said here that if we add or subtract the stuff inside the argument of the limit, then they could be separated out and do them individually. So there's all sorts of stuff about the linearity of limits and things like that. Again, this is not really the point. The point here is to say, like, we had this stuff over here, and then I jumped over to this stuff over here talking about complex numbers, and then we jumped down here to talk about limits, and then over here, and then up over in this section. So, like, right, this is all over the place. But that's the point, is that when you do live notes, you're going to be going all over the place. You're going to be, like, coming up with different sections of the board that you're using. I don't necessarily recommend it to be quite this random, but at the same time, it actually works out pretty nicely. Okay, whereas... Oh, man. Yeah. Again. Okay. For example, consider a teacher demonstrating how to make a graph of a function. Chronologically, the teacher is going to write the functional relationship, then make a table of values, perhaps generating a list of values for the x variable, which would be followed by calculating the values for the y value, corresponding y values, and the teacher then draws an appropriate set of xy coordinates, consideration of the domain of range, the values of the table, do an appropriate graph in the correct location, all followed by labeling and numbering of the axes, plotting each ordered pair from the table of values, and finally drawing the curve. All the while, the teacher will be narrating what is happening and why certain choices and decisions are being made, and how and why certain actions are being performed. Okay, we've got ads coming up here, like now, so we'll be back in 3 minutes, and we'll discuss more about this. So thanks everybody for coming. Be right back.
Heart stop when you first saw me. Did your world stop spinning? Does your world revolve around me?
Travel far from where you are. Fly from Leeds Bradford Airport with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. If distance were no object, what would you do?
We'd go back to Hong Kong, to where we honeymooned.
Dim sum for breakfast? Oh, sign me up.
Rio for us. We'll take a samba class and samba on down to Pedro de Sal.
Travel far from where you are. Fly from Leeds Bradford Airport via Amsterdam with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. Visit klm.co.uk.
Alrighty, welcome back everybody. Thanks for sticking around. And we are gonna get back into it. So, again, teacher is narrating what is happening as they're making all of their individual choices and the decisions that are being made and how and why certain actions are being performed. Although linear in a chronological sense, this is how this is unfolding spatially is going to be non-linear. The teacher starts in the top left-hand corner of the board or page with the function, works vertically down to create the table of values and the x values, followed by a return to the top of the table to fill in the y values. Some of the calculations for this are being performed in the bottom right of the board. Teacher moves to the top middle of the board to start drawing axes, etc., etc. When this process is complete, the resultant static images are the dead notes, in which neither the chronological nor spatial sequencing is evident. Alright, so setting aside for the moment the fact that this scenario represents a situation in which the teacher, rather than the students, is the one that have done all the thinking, the other problem is that more than half of the students who are not keeping up are left to copy dead notes. And part of the other problem is that they don't get to write the narrative down.
The all-new iPhone 17 Pro is designed with the ultimate pro camera system.
Hashtag definitely not sponsored.
So you can take amazing photos and share them on EE. Because the most powerful iPhone yet deserves the best network.
I'd take Apple money, but they don't want me. This is not like copying a sentence written on the board where they can read it, make sense of it, and then write it out. Copying an image without the benefit of chronological and spatial sequencing requires students to look repeatedly between the board and their page to get all the details of, for example, the graph of the table of values, the axes, the plotted ordered pairs, the graph in the correct place. This continual effort to track, write, and keep up with the teacher's thinking requires a huge amount of cognitive effort, which causes students to fall further behind to the point where they just stop listening and trying to make sense of what they're writing. They just listen to the teacher. This is exactly what we observed in the behavior of students who are not keeping up with the leading edge of the live notes. It started with a lot of head movement as the students looked from the dead notes to their notebook to the live notes in the teacher, back to the dead notes, back to the notebook, and so on. Eventually, and sometimes rather quickly, they stopped looking at live notes altogether. When this happened, they stopped trying to gain the benefit of the chronological and spatial sequencing of what the teacher was doing and saying, and resigned themselves to just copying dead notes whenever they could get to them. So, researcher, I noticed you were falling behind in the notes today. And student, definitely not named Philip. Yeah, that usually happens. So how do you know what order the notes, to write the notes in if you're not keeping up? Huh? Just write what's on the board. Well, of course, but what part of the board do you start with? Well, I start at the top left and just kind of copy what's on the board. I don't really follow any order. Sometimes I start with the biggest thing and then just start writing little things around it. And when this happened, they stopped listening to the teacher entirely. So when you were behind on notes like that, are you trying to listen to what the teacher's saying? Stephanie, sometimes, I guess. It didn't look like that at the end. No, not at the end. I'd given up by then. But at the beginning, when I was trying to keep up, I was listening. This may be why several students declared that they would rather listen than write notes. For the students, writing notes and listening to the teacher are pretty much an either-or scenario. Either they're listening to the teacher at the leading edge of the live notes, or they're copying dead notes like Stephanie did without listening entirely. Interviewer, say a bit more about why you can either listen or write notes. Why not both at the same time? Alana, oh, I can do both for a while at the beginning, but when I start to fall behind, I just end up writing the whole class, and I miss everything the teacher's saying. And in the end, I don't even know what I've written anyways. Because you weren't listening? No, because I actually stopped paying attention to what I'm writing. I go into this kind of zombie state and just copy whatever's on the board. This is why I've decided to just listen to the teacher. I can take a picture of my friend's notes later. Like Alana, nearly all of the students we observed either falling behind on notes or listening, or only listening, had the same refrain. Copying dead notes was a mindless activity. This was evident in the body language of the students that we observed. As they fell behind, they slipped into a sort of malaise as their attention to what they were doing ended up waning. Fill in the blank notes seems like a good way to mitigate the issue of students falling behind. And indeed, when asked why teachers use fill in the blank notes, all 3 teachers said that this way was to make sure that the students can spend more time listening than writing. However, when we observed student behaviors in these classes, something new and even more troubling emerged. Although it's true that students spent much less time writing and they did not fall behind, very few students, 35%, actually spent that time listening, at least in the ways that teachers had intended. Instead, they were listening for key terms or phrases, or watching for key steps in the examples. In fact, many of the students we observed would not be listening at all, and were only copying what their neighbors wrote in the blanks in the first place. They were simply trying to get the information necessary to fill in the blanks, rather than trying to understand the bigger picture. This is pretty much the same as what we saw in... I don't even remember. One of the earlier sections. Come on. Where is it? I mean, somewhat what homework looks like, right? Yeah, no problem, Woodcraft. Have a good time with your kid. There are times when there are absolutely magical moments with the little ones that I wouldn't give up for anything, and I wish we could go back there. And at the same time, most of that time was very hard as well, just in a very different way. So yeah, the students were simply trying to get the information necessary to fill in the blanks. So they were looking for, like, individual things, just the thing that was, like, the minimum amount to get in, do the task, and get out. Actually, multiple. We've talked about this in multiple places. So the homework, but as well as the activities themselves, right? Students would work on activities at the minimum level. They were just looking for keywords, key information that they needed to get in, get out. Many students also would ask the teacher, right, to do all of the work, the thinking work for them. So, all the same stuff there. This is not to say that all the students who were keeping up were any more actively involved than those who weren't. Of all the students we interviewed, just over a third of them were keeping up with the live notes, but most still admitted they weren't thinking about much. Not much, really? Samantha: yep. So what were you doing the whole time? What are you doing the whole time you're taking notes? Just copying them down. I actually like this. It's easy and I don't need to think much. The only difference between those students and those that were copying dead notes was that they were just copying faster. All of this showed us that time spent having students create notes was, for the most part, not well spent. Both the I write, you write, and fill-in-the-blank methods of producing notes were activities that were antithetical to student thinking and antithetical to building a thinking classroom. The next question then became, what was the value of these notes when non-thinking time, what was the value of these notes given the non-thinking time it took to create them? What did the students actually use them for? To answer this question, we asked each of the students in these 13 classes to answer a one-question survey. Do you use your notes on a regular basis? Please elaborate. The results of the survey were disappointing, with only 18% of students, 5 or fewer in most classes, stating that they regularly use their notes in one way or another. So let me get this straight. I just saw you write notes for 35 minutes, and you're telling me you're not going to use them? Why not? Nahal: I mean, they're almost exactly what's in the textbook. So if I need to look something up while I'm doing my homework, I just flip a few pages back in the textbook. So why write notes? It's what we do in class. Can you explain a little bit more about why you don't use your notes when doing homework? Stephen: I try to do the homework in my spare time, which is the next... I try to do my homework in my spare, which is like study hall or something, which is the next block. So usually I can still remember things from class. So why do you write notes? I don't know, I guess it's just what we do. So if the writing of notes is a non-thinking activity and few students even use them in the first place, the question became, how can we reimagine note-taking as a meaningful thinking activity? Right? The number one excuse for any of this stuff was the students just say, well, I don't know, it's the activity that we do in class, so of course we take notes because we're supposed to. That's pretty much it. To figure out how to make note-taking a thinking activity, Peter said that he began observing students in settings where they were not required to take notes, but did anyway. Here, I asked people who were not writing notes why they were not, especially given some of their peers were. I learned there are 3 main reasons students don't take notes if not required to. So, when not required to take notes, those students who did not take notes didn't take notes because they're not going to write notes on something that they don't find interesting or important. All right, fair enough. Number 2, they will not write notes on something that they know they can just find elsewhere. Right? If they could go look it up in their notebook, if they could go look it up in their textbook, if they can go onto Wikipedia, if they can go onto wherever and just find the information they need, they're not going to copy it down and physically write it down. It's pointless to them. And third, they will not write notes on something. Ew. I don't know how that happened. On something they think they will remember. Right? If they're pretty sure that they can just remember it, then yeah, they're not going to take any sort of notes on that. But other students did take notes on certain subjects. Again, either they found it important or interesting, and or they didn't think they could just look it up somewhere else, or they didn't want to, or didn't think that they should bother, and or they think they won't remember it. Right? So any of those students who did take notes pretty much just negate those statements. And that's what their mental state was for that particular thing that they were copying things down. Right? So this means that, as I just said, students in these situations only take notes about things that they feel are important and for which documentation does not exist somewhere else, and for their future forgetful selves. I like that particular phrase. This is the essence of mindful as opposed to mindless note-taking, and meaningful as opposed to meaningless note-taking, and became the focus of our first intervention into note-taking. We were going to have students write notes for their future forgetful selves. In the end, we discovered that this was a thinking approach to note-taking. In other words, we found a way to make meaningful notes. However, it did not come easily to all students at first, naturally. It never does. This is all a matter of practice. It's all a matter of understanding how to make this work. Okay. We tried this thinking approach to note-taking with 11 teachers, grades 4 through 12, in 48 classrooms. These teachers were all working within the framework of having students do curriculum-based thinking tasks in random groups on vertical non-permanent surfaces, and their rooms were all defronted. So many of the things that have already been working for building thinking classrooms, they were all at varying stages of competency with the rest of the aforementioned thinking room practices. So, mixed bag. Many of them had already started shifting their homework into check your understanding problems. Many of them had already done all sorts of other stuff. The teachers each committed to running their classrooms as they always did, with the exception that, toward the end of the lesson, they would ask their students to sit down at their desks and write some notes to their future forgetful selves. They elaborated on this by asking, what are you going to write down so that in 3 weeks you will remember what you learned today? You, personally. I asked that they allow a minimum of 10 minutes for this activity. This worked wonderfully in grades 4, 5, and 6. With students producing beautiful and personalized representations of what they had learned. Some students used a lot of pictures, some included examples, some wrote out whole sentences explaining what they had done. Of course, some students struggled, but they were in the minority. It worked okay in grades 11 and 12, but these students struggled with this more than the younger students. Suggestions that they include examples and annotate those examples with comments about what they did all helped. It also helped to share some examples of different types of notes and ask students to discuss in random groups, or in their groups, which notes were useful and why. This helped to make explicit the qualities of notes which were meaningful to them. What helped the most, however, was circling back 3 weeks later with questions that required them to use those notes. Right? So what are you going to need to remember in 3 weeks and probably forget between now and then? Again, annotated examples with pictures, narrative, whatever any student thinks they will need. Okay, and again, worked best when they check back in 3 weeks and ask questions about ask questions that required them to use the notes. So once you do check back in 3 weeks, right, you'll say, okay, now here's a bunch of questions. Does this work with the notes that you have? Is it going to help you? If the answer is yes, then great job. You got it. If it doesn't, then we need to alter your notes a little bit and say, okay, this didn't work, so what do you need? What's going to have to change in order to make it work? And then you can discuss with your groups and stuff like that to make sure that, okay, we do understand what it is. What is it that you need? What are your individual needs that are not being met by these notes, and what could work better? It's all an experiment. This gave relatively quick feedback to them as to what they would find useful 3 weeks down the road. So that's also really interesting in a 15-week class. Whereas you do get, roughly speaking, 12 weeks worth of feedback. You've also now got a couple of days or a couple of weeks worth of other notes which are not going to work too well for you. Hopefully they were evolved a little bit between then. Similar to this is a discussion of what good group work looks like what Sarah Vanderwerf has to say on this. Interesting. All right, I will. Thank you, Zach. Get that one popped up over there. Okay. By and large, they had underestimated how much they would forget. And this experience had an immediate and significant impact on how carefully they annotated new notes from that point forward. She shows pictures of what students are doing after doing a task and has them discuss. Interestingly, grades 8 and 9 struggled the most with this particular task. The vast majority of these students were at a complete loss as to what to write and for what purpose. Some wrote literally everything they could think of, while others were paralyzed by the vast possibility of what to write. Suggestions to include examples helped for some, but only exasperated those who were struggling with what to select. The use of exemplars and circling back 3 weeks later had little impact on these students. Interviews with these students revealed some of the issues. I see you haven't written much. Patrick. Why not? What's the problem? I don't know. In my other classes, we just copy whatever the teacher writes on the board. I like that better. Why is that? I don't know. I don't have to think about it as much. I guess, I don't have to decide what to write. That's hard. In general, we were finding that by grade 8, students have become encultured into a more mindless form of note-taking, and they have lost the ability to decide for themselves what to write down. And also, let's keep in mind, grade 6, 7, 8 is right about the time that the prefrontal cortex just kind of shuts down. And teenagers do not have the ability to make meaningful, thoughtful decisions unless they really work at it. The younger students did not suffer from this and were more than happy to write down what they wanted. This is not to say they did not benefit from some guidance, but they were not impeded by this preconceived notion that taking notes is a mindless activity. Likewise, older students, although even more encultured into this note-taking as a mindless activity idea, were more aware of the role of notes as a potentially meaningful activity. The grade 8 and 9 students had not yet come to this realization, as they had considered note-taking something that they did for the teacher, not themselves. Right, so that's another...
Welcome to Paris Pizzeria. Your blind date is already at the table, and there she is. Cousin Brenda, what are you doing here? You're married anyway.
Substitution brought to you by Paddy Power. Cousin Brenda makes way for
Right, notes are like check your understanding questions.
Pick the right starter, but your sub can still deliver. Because with Paddy's Super Sub, your bet rolls over to the player
For students.
valid on selected leagues and markets only. Pre-match and in-play bets on qualifying player outcome selections only. T's and C's and exclusions. 18 plus. GambleAware.org.
Right? So we should reframe this again, not as, hey, these are for the teacher. You're not just copying this down for the culture of copying it down or to look like a good student. You are copying this down for you, for yourself, for your forgetful future self. All right, so what the grade 8 and 9 students needed, in essence, was a support tool to help scaffold and organize their notes. With this in mind, we've turned to graphic organizers. Graphic organizers have been used with great success in the humanities teaching for decades. The initial impetus was to try to use these as a template for note-taking, which came from a group of teachers who had some experiences teaching in the humanities area. Graphic organizers can take many forms, but we experimented with 4 different types. The first of which, type 1, is just to have students write meaningful notes in a cell of limited size. The idea is that they can write whatever they want in their notes today, but it all has to fit in one cell. In the case of the example that's given, it is 1/8 of a page. So essentially what you have them do is fold the sheet in half tall ways and then fold it down in half twice along that long dimension. Or across the short dimension. This constraint on available space helps students focus what they want to write to their future forgetful selves. As before, some students choose to write diagrams or examples, while others opted for more words. Yeah, so these are the graphic organizers here with some examples. The second type of graphic organizer, type 2, has the same sort of cell structure as type 1, but students are allowed to use those cells as a way to organize different aspects of their notes. So, whereas the limited space organizer, type 1, dictates where and how much of the students can write, type 2, neither of these things is limited. Rather, the cells are a way for students to demarcate different aspects of their notes. So, type 2 has different demarcations, which are up to the student to figure out how much they need on any given day and for what subjects and whatever else. And then the Type 3 graphic organizer has pre-labeled cells to demarcate different subtopics, and it could, again, depend on what exactly you need for each of these things. And here's a picture. They're making a Type 3 organizer with pre-labeled cells to demarcate different subtopics. So this is just a picture of a student doing that. Type 3 formalizes the organization and demarcation aspects of Type 2, and unlike Type 2, the Type 3 graphic organizer, the teacher pre-labels the cells according to things they feel are important for students to record. The student can write whatever they want, but the category is predetermined. I would imagine that the Type 3 would be more useful for if you have ability tracked students. Probably the lower ability tracks would be more prone to needing some help on the organization, but also younger students who maybe haven't been quite brought into the fold of trying to figure all this stuff out. So, I don't know. What all three of these organizers have in common is a focus on brevity, and although quite different in style, result is an entire unit of notes on two sides of a page. So, one unit, front, back, that's it. This, along with the allocation of where to write, seems to be tremendously liberating for students who are paralyzed by the possibility of choice. Something else they all have in common, but not explicitly, is that they all allow for the possibility of students to include worked examples. Unfortunately, our research showed that very few students seize the opportunity on their own. This is problematic in that worked examples are an important part of notes and convey what John Mason and David Pym, 1984, refer to as the general in the particular. Through worked examples, students communicate to their future selves not only how to do something, but why it is done. The communication is enhanced, of course, if they go beyond the inclusion of worked examples and begin to annotate these examples. To make this explicit, Type 3 could include demarcated spaces for worked examples to be added. So, actually demarcate worked examples. Alternatively, an altogether different type of graphic organizer, Type 4, may be used. As opposed to breaking content into subtopics like Types 2 and 3, this organizer differentiates among vocabulary and definitions, big ideas and concepts, procedures and examples. These cells can be created and pre-labeled by the teacher or done entirely by the students. Some teachers have students create and fill a new one of these for every single lesson, whereas others have the students do one per unit and then add to it at the end of every lesson. So that one's just those four cells, right? Vocabulary definition, big ideas and concepts, examples, procedures. What is important, however, is that the inclusion of worked examples is explicit. So state that it really needs to be done. You really should put in worked examples. Regardless of whether graphic organizers are used or not, we learn from experimenting with having students write notes to their future forgetful selves that there are three distinct competencies needed for students to be able to produce useful worked examples that are meaningful to them. So, 1. Creation. These students need to be able to produce a worked example by themselves. So again, using all of the previous stuff we've been talking about, this is going to be mostly for the students for whom we have consolidated the lesson by sweeping from the bottom. They should be able to do some sort of worked example to say, yes, I can make one of these. I can go into my book, I can take one of the questions that's in the check your competency or check your understanding section, and I can do it myself. All right, 2, annotation. Using small phrases and side examples as signposts on the journey through a worked example. Right? They put small phrases and signposts on the way through their worked example to explain how and why things are done. And 3, selection. Choose an appropriate question to form the basis of a worked example.
Far from where you are, flying from Leeds Bradford Airport with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. If distance we know object.
Or choose an appropriate example to represent a certain concept. Or that's fine. So students need to be able to figure out what an appropriate example is and what it represents within the larger context of, say, the objectives for the course or the objectives for that section. Of these, creation is the easiest competency to acquire. Students, when given a specific question, usually had little difficulty producing a worked example. So, like I said, do the check your understanding problems. If you do understand it, then they were able to produce one of their own. Very few students, however, spontaneously use this as an opportunity to begin annotating their examples. We found that we could enhance this skill in students by first having them annotate complete but incorrect worked examples. Right, so here practice by annotating complete but incorrect examples. The most difficult of the 3 competencies, however, is the selection of a question to create a worked example in response to. As teachers, we know that the worked example needs to stand in a general sense as a proxy for a wide range of examples, whereas an appropriately chosen question can make transparent every single step of a worked example. A poorly chosen numbers can obfuscate what is happening. For example, 2 raised to the second power equals 4 makes ambiguous the role that the exponent is playing in this equation. Is it a multiplicand, or the number of times 2 is being multiplied, i.e. an exponent, which Yeah. But students who are unfamiliar with exponents are going to have a hard time and maybe wonder, okay, is it 2 times 2? Student selection competency improved when the teachers gave them a set of questions to choose from. Okay, so teachers are going to provide a vetted list for anyone struggling to choose and for the early days of a particular concept. Pass on that one. Okay. So this occurred in 2 ways. The first was to give the students a list of questions from which to choose 1 or 2 to develop as worked examples. This could either be integrated right into type 3 or 4 graphic organizers, or simply listed on the board. The second was to draw their attention to the fact that they had just worked through several curriculum questions in their random groups on the whiteboards, and that 1 or 2 of these examples may very well provide good worked examples. Regardless, narrowing the choice to some small finite number helps students to begin to make appropriate selections. And again, right? Choose from one of those on the whiteboards. So again, this is to try to help the anxiety of freedom of choice to kind of work that down so that the students aren't going to be so super anxious about having an infinite number of problems that they could choose from. You just say, look, pick one of these around here, or pick from this list here. In the end, we studied teachers' efforts to scaffold students' autonomous note-taking in 5 classrooms using some variation of the aforementioned graphic organizers alongside strategies for helping students create or select and then annotate worked examples. We now observed
Never feel so much, don't wanna leave. A step between. 'Cause when you knock me
75 to 100% of students took notes, and 50% referred back to their notes. At some point. And again, this was just with these small changes. Again, provide a graphic organizer, encourage students to create, annotate, and select problems, and help them along the way to make sure that they can do that. This then made sure that, again, 75 to 100% of students were taking notes at all, which back here, it said that 86% of students were taking some notes, and they were pretty much all eventually working out to be dead note copying, where they were just like, I don't know what's going on. It's just, mindless writing. Whereas over here, 75 to 100% of the students took notes, and this is meaningful notes, things that are meaningful to them that they will be able to refer back to in 3 weeks and say, do I then actually remember this material? And again, 50% of students, 50% of all students, well, okay, 50% of, okay. In the classes where we only had 75%, right, is this 50% of including them? Or probably not. But probably 50% of those students referred to their notes at some point. Whereas, from before, we said that number was... I thought there was a... Yeah, 18% of students actually used it for anything. That's now up to 50%. So, like, these are huge gains. It's already... Students are thinking that these things are more important, and they're actually making them, and they're actually meaningful, and then they're actually going back to look at them. Okay. Last concept here in 20 seconds. I'll stall it. Snooze. Okay. So, last couple of pieces of information before we go to break, and then when we come back from break, we'll do the FAQ and the wrap-up. Okay, often this referring back occurred when they're doing their check their understanding questions. So, we're talking about, going back when they're doing check your understanding questions to look back at these particular problems that they have now annotated and selected. But it also occurred during their time working on the whiteboards in random groups, when, as a group, they felt the need to go look something up that they had previously learned. They went back to their notes, which are now annotated, rather than going to a textbook, or rather than going to some other piece of information. The students who took notes in this mindful and thoughtful way found more meaning in and use for those notes. The notes became a way for students to consolidate the learning that they had experienced in their collaborative groups. Unlike the teacher-led consolidation in Chapter 10, meaningful note-taking is student-led and is a vital part of transitioning from collective knowing into individual knowing and doing. Right, so first off, we have our consolidation is collective knowing. And the note-taking then becomes individual, individual, individual knowing and doing. This will be discussed more in Chapter 15, which is the big wrap-up that we do at the end. Here is an example of student notes on quadratic functions. Good times, good stuff. Alright, so that's gonna finish up the actual content for this part. As I said, we'll do the 3-minute break and then we'll pop back over to the FAQ portion. So this is going to be the typical what teachers have done as feedback for Peter, and what information they have given him or what questions they have asked through their initial learning of this material. And this is generally speaking things that like the research teachers or the second generation of teachers who are learning about this were asking him. So we'll be back in 3 minutes. See you in just a little bit. Thanks for coming, everybody.
feel free, and I just wanna be me. Yeah, I just wanna go so crazy. I just wanna be a freak. Yeah, I just wanna rise to the top. Yeah, I just wanna go reach the peak. So I've been really well focused on success. Hey, y'all will see. Yeah, you won't see that I will get it. Cause I'm really focused, man. I make it with the rap and I just follow my path. I just follow my passion. To me, this is what's precious. Yeah, in my soul, man, I can feel it. So every single verse, man, I just gotta go and kill it, man. I gotta be the kid. I could be the guy taking you wild. I could be the villain, but that is okay. Lately, I'm painting my path on my way. Yeah, I got no time that I can waste. So I've been sitting in the space. Yeah, making rest every day, man. You know that I go insane. Yeah, I hit you with a bullet to the brain. Let us stop first, cause we going insane. You don't know what I'm gonna do. You don't know what is next. And I'm loving the fact, truly it's making me blessed. Cause I work on my team, no snakes in the grass. And we have been trusting the wind because of the work that we did in the past. Because of the work that we did in the past. When we went to hours, we barely got rest. So I get the realm and we didn't finesse. So I got the feelings that we might be next. Cause when we go in, we win in the match. When we go in, we win in the match. So that's how we do, cause we be the best. We be the best, best. Yeah, we be the best. Whoa. Yeah, we be the best, best. We be the best. Hey, yeah, we be the best, best. Hey, we be the best. Yo, you wanna come on my test? Whoa, you want to see we the best? Hey, you don't see that we're the best kid, so I suggest you never really come and test it. But otherwise, I will smack your face like Michael Jordan does with a ball on the basket. Oh damn kid, but you didn't expect it. You never really thought that this could just happen. But now I'm really coming and we pull out with the action. Cause people defeat those they don't get it like.
incredible new single, Ocean, with Jessie Reyes. Calvin Harris and Jessie Reyes. Ocean. Listen on Spotify now.
From stargazing to nice to meet you, Miles Smith is now back with Stay, his brand new single. Miles Smith, Stay. Listen now on Spotify.
All right. One last thing before we do anything else. We're going to do some eskrima tonight because I have cleaned up some of this stuff. Cool. Okay, I just have to watch out there. And I'm good on that side. Cool. So, I've been taking eskrima for a year and a little bit, almost a year and a half. The point of eskrima was originally a martial art that was to protect the people who were working in the Philippines from the crime families that had originally started forming up and were hustling money out of the workers. So the workers eventually organized and decided, you know what, you're not going to take our money anymore. And they all learned how to defend themselves against the heavies that they were sending, and ended up creating an entire new martial art, which used machetes as their primary weapon. When the Spanish came around, they were really nervous about the Filipino people having a bunch of machetes waving around, and they were like, yeah, you're not going to practice that anymore. And threatened, sometimes at gunpoint, to not do this anymore. And the people said, okay, fine, and started training with sticks. So eskrima is often known as a club martial art, but oftentimes it is also, because it's from machetes, it's a sword martial art. So there are two ways to do things. One is by doing single machete. So typically you'll see somebody who's walking around with, typically they have one machete, and the way that they will guard up is essentially by putting one hand near their center of mass so that they can deflect any sort of weapons coming at them. And then the second is using a simple strike, which is coming out, and the other hand is used for counterbalance. So basically we're stretching these muscles here in the back. So we do some simple shots like this. My instructor generally stands a little more square. I typically stand sideways because I don't want... Actually, that's a terrible idea because you can't block down here very well. But if you stand squarer, you do actually stand a better chance of actually blocking anything that's coming in. And typically, again, we got our number 1 is just a simple strike. Number 2 is a double strike. Number 3 is a single strike, followed by going over the top, and then doing a single strike again. It took me a while because sometimes I forget. So single, up over the top, and single again. A number 4 is a single strike followed by moving to an open guard position, and then we do a single strike across. We stop our arm as we're coming through with our other hand, with our guard hand, and that causes this to flick outward. I do this also in Tai Chi. So it goes like that, and then we also flick this back over and do a single strike. Oftentimes it's one fluid motion. The number 5 I keep forgetting, but I think it's essentially comes out, open guard position, and then we go to a overhead strike, and then back over here again. Could be wrong. There's a bunch of them that they all get mixed up in my head. And there's another one that is a fan block. So it goes up over the top like this to a backhand, and then a forehand. So it's a fan. And then we do what's called a kadlik, where this is going to come from here. I'm basically going to drop my center of gravity this way, and then the hand just follows along. It is an absolutely nasty strike, because here this is coming across this way and whipping down. So by dropping the center of mass, you're just letting that follow through. And then we do our 2-stick method. So again, we can start from here. We do what's called sticks to heaven. So it is a single strike and a return, followed by single strike up. And then we twist and swap positions with a single strike down, and then this returns to ready position. So again, from the opposite side, this is normally you start on the right because most people are right-handed. Single strike down, return, single strike up, twist, swap, and back. We can also come from the shoulders. So back in the day, if people were carrying stuff like rolls of hay, I don't know, chopped grass, chopped vines and things like that, or crops, if they had their crops attached to their machetes and somebody tried to hustle them, they could effectively tip these up, drop all their stuff off, and then now they've got 2 machetes on them. From here, we could drop immediately from the shoulders and come up with a double strike like this. They come up this way with our forearms exposed, and then we twist around, and the blades are yet again striking upward. So both here and here, the blades are coming through this front area. And then we can also drop from the shoulders and come forward. Again, this is a little bit harder for me because my wrist doesn't want to cooperate, but you drop cross like this, and then cross like that. And then try and come up that way.
Travel far from where you are. Flying from Leeds Bradford Airport with KLM Royal Dutch Airlines.
It's very awkward for me. Then from here we also do a few others. So we have one that's a we also have the standard single strikes this way. These are good warm-ups. Because again, now you've got to twist your hands the right way to make sure that the blade is always coming up or the blade is always coming down. This works also pretty well if you like tape one side and say like, this is the blade. We also do... There's a few others. Typically we go from the ready position on the side. From here we can do a cheeky strike this way, which is the forehand strike of the fan block, but it doesn't involve us using the backhand strike at all. So it just comes from the shoulder, goes to a forehand strike. We come across with the other one, and this goes to our shoulder. And then here we do a kadlik, and now we're at this ready position on the left. And notice, right, like our sticks have traded places. And then again, we do it from this side. And then we could do the follow-along strike, which is where one comes through, the other follows it. The first one comes through, the second one follows it. Typically, you're going like this. We're just doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and returning 1, 2, 3, 4. And then there's also, if we take a downward strike with the right side, or the one that's on your shoulder, followed by... Nope. It's... We do a downward strike and then immediately come up above our head with our hand. Then this can come across. And then this can come down for a second strike. So this is a slightly awkward, but 1, 2, 3. I didn't quite do that properly, but whatever. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So bringing it all together, you can do all sorts of fun stuff, where we end up doing like sticks to heaven, followed by a 3 strike, followed by one of those, followed by another sticks to heaven, followed by a using an upward block in sticks to heaven. That is Heaven to Earth, I think. I don't remember exactly. It's been a while since all the names have been pounded into my head, but at any rate, that is Eskrima. It is a fun martial art. I do not recommend it for anybody as their first martial art. It is perfectly possible to do it, but I have been... It has been fairly ground into me that, like, you should not be doing weapon arts unless you understand your body very well. Which, for the most part, you want to do karate, taekwondo, tai chi, something like that that uses your body first. And once you understand how your body works, then you can start playing with weapons. And obviously, be very careful, because weapons hurt a lot, even if it's just sticks. Also, check your regional laws. If I carry those club weapons around for any purpose other than going to and from class, that's a bad day. Not that I would, but nonetheless. Okay. So, talking about the FAQ type stuff. You mentioned that the I write, you write, and fill in the blank notes, in the use of those notes, students take notes for the wrong reason and then don't look at them. How can I make sure that this doesn't happen when I switch to meaningful notes? The most important thing you can do for this is messaging. The message needs to be that the message that needs to be used repeatedly has to do with whom the notes are for, right? They are by them and for them. This cannot be overstated. When you first introduce the notion of notes to their future forgetful selves, use that phrasing and use it every time you discuss notes with the students. This is to counteract the current student belief that notes are by the teacher and for the teacher's benefit. So, for example, if a student asks you if their notes are good, resist the urge to impose your own judgment on those notes and instead ask the student if they think the notes will be useful for them in a few weeks. Right? Will they be useful for you in 3 weeks? If they're like, well, I don't have any idea, you could say, all right, what do you think you're going to forget about this particular thing? Don't worry about what your friends are doing, right? Don't worry about what you think I want, because I don't care, right? I already remember all this stuff. I only have to glance at my personal notes, and I know, for the next hour what I'm going to be teaching, if I'm doing like a lecture style class. Right? So are these notes going to be useful for you in 3 weeks' time? If the answer is no, then you've got to figure out, the student needs to figure out how to adapt to try and make it useful for them at a future time. How important is it for students in different grades to take notes? As mentioned, meaningful notes serve two purposes. One, to create a record, and 2, to reify and consolidate their individual learning. Although student notes as a record may only feel relevant for higher grades, meaningful notes as individually consolidating their learning was shown in our research to be relevant in the learning of students as young as grade 3. It seems like it would be easiest to have students write meaningful notes right after I have consolidated from the bottom. Is this correct? Absolutely. Especially when you are first introducing these types of notes. Students' meaningful notes are a natural extension of, and easier for students to do if immediately preceded by, the collective reifying experience of consolidation from the bottom. For this reason, when consolidating from the bottom, mark up the boards that you were discussing with circles and annotations, and this allows you to model what students should be doing in their own work. Also, number the examples you discuss as you are doing it. These two acts will help draw students' attention to the things that they may wish to include in their personal meaningful notes. My students take pictures of the work they produce in their random groups while at the vertical non-permanent surfaces. Is this the same as notes? And this may be to Woodcraft's point earlier. Right? So, do you record classes? Would that help the issues with note-taking, having not enough time, etc.? Or will students pay less attention since they can see the videos later? So, somewhat, the actually being able to look at look at video of the class will encourage students to not worry so much. So I do like that they're not going to be so hung up on, oh no, I need to follow along like live. That's okay. The students can relax a little bit if it is recorded. I don't record my classes. The only thing that I provide is pictures of whiteboards that I have done. I have also, in other scenarios, taken pictures of individual boards and been like, okay, these are the ones I'm using for consolidation. And I grant you, those are dead notes after class is over. So what they need to do then is to be able to remember how it was that these students went through their individual processes. So it may be a little bit more difficult, but we can potentially make it work. So Peter says, we had the same question. Turns out the answer is that no. Students taking pictures of the work they produce is not the same as taking notes. Having the pictures in their phone is not, in and of itself, very useful. A picture is just a record of what they're done. Again, dead notes. It is the act of reifying these pictures into meaningful notes that helps move the thinking forward. So students are going to need to take that information, wherever it might be, and then individually, personally, move it to one of these graphical organizers in order to understand how to make all of this make sense to them. So if students are wanting to take pictures of their work or the work of others, encourage them to do so, but then make sure you, likewise, encourage them to turn those pictures into notes for their future forgetful selves. Do you have any other hints to help my students produce better meaningful notes? A very easy and effective way to introduce meaningful notes after consolidation from the bottom is to send the students in their random groups back to their boards to collaboratively write notes to their future forgetful selves. Not only does the ensuing conversation drive reification, but also using the collaborative large space is a very safe way to start taking notes, to try and understand what would be meaningful to me. Let's communicate amongst each other. Oh, really? That would be meaningful for you? Interesting. I don't think that would be meaningful for me. Right? Seeing things from other perspectives will also be helpful for the students to understand each other. right? This also affords the immediate ability for you to help draw students' attention to notes that might be useful for them. For example, when the activity is done, give every student 3 sticky notes and ask them to walk around the room and place sticky notes on the collaborative notes that they would find most useful for them in 3 weeks' time. Follow this up with a discussion about what it is about those boards that received lots of sticky notes and what makes them such meaningful notes. Create a list, post the list, maybe along with some pictures, and the next time you do the activity. In very short order, students will be able to write meaningful notes on their own. If these notes are by students for students, then it sounds like I can't be checking to make sure that they have written something that is complete and useful to them in the future. Is that correct? Yes. Despite the effectiveness of meaningful notes, there will still be 15 to 30% of students who write nothing. As with check your understanding questions, any efforts to reduce this number had an immediate negative effect on the way the rest of the students in the class engaged with that process. These notes, by their very nature, are taken by students for students. We are providing them with opportunities and structure to do what is best for them. And again, any alteration can cause immediate negative effects for those people who are actually doing it. If they do not seize the opportunities or use these structures, that is going to be their choice. When we tried to force these upon them by checking or marking that they were actually doing them, the dynamic immediately shifted back toward what we were observing in fill-in-the-blank notes. Students just mindlessly filling in boxes, copying off of each other, not using the notes, and not thinking about it. This shift in behavior was not just among students we were trying to impact. This behavior spread immediately to most of the students who had previously been, with or without the graphic organizers, mindfully and meaningfully taking notes for their future forgetful selves. The notes were no longer by them for them, they were now for the teacher. Just like check your understanding questions, meaningful notes are an incredibly sensitive structure. Whether you choose to use graphic organizers or not, the messaging around the fact that these are by students for students is absolutely vital. Anything you do to force the issue changes in profoundly negative ways whom they perceive the notes are for. If students choose what to write and I can't mark their notes, how can I know that what they're writing is correct? You can't. But then again, you can't really know whether students are doing it correctly when writing your I write, you write, or fill in the blank notes either. You just have to trust that they will. The other thing that you can potentially do is ask them in a one-on-one conference, right? What do your notes say about this particular section? And you can just ask them. Don't mark them down. Don't say, oh no, you didn't do it. You deserve a lower grade. Like, don't mention any of that stuff. You just ask them, what do your notes say? And if they say, I don't have notes, you just say, okay, well, this could have been an opportunity for you to be able to check how this worked and to be able to look up how to do this particular example. Are graphic organizers just for grades 8 and 9? No. We explored these initially in the context of grades 8 and 9 because they were too encultured to note-taking as being an example of mindless and meaningless activity, and the prompt to write notes to their future forgetful selves was not enough to override this enculturation. But we quickly learned that graphic organizers of any type were useful for all students grades 3 through 12. Should we pull back on the scaffolding in the graphic organizers as the students move throughout the year? Depending on the grade, yes. For example, grade 12 students in preparation for post-secondary studies should be able to write meaningful notes without any scaffolding by the end of the course. For the rest of the grades, you can proceed as you feel is best. The bottom line is that the notes to their future forgetful selves do not need to be as much scaffolding, or do not need as much scaffolding, once the students realize that these notes are for them and by them. The same is true of the scaffolding around worked examples. You may start the year by giving them a list from which you want to choose a question to develop a worked example. The goal is to gradually move them towards selecting for themselves what would make a good example. Can't we just stop doing notes together and just put them all online? We tried this. On the plus side, this freed up more time in the lesson for thinking activities such as collaboration, discussion, and solving thinking tasks. On the minus side, however, the elimination of notes altogether also eliminated the opportunity for students to reify and consolidate their individual learning. So it was still stuck in the collaborative learning section. Okay. So the macro move is to have students write meaningful notes by them, for them. And our micro moves here, right? Emphasize over and over and over again every time you use notes that these are by you and for you, and these are notes to your future forgetful selves. You're going to forget some of this material. What is it that you are going to forget? Not your neighbor, not your friend, you. Right? Write notes to their future forgetful selves. Use graphic organizers. And again, the easy ones, you can just take a sheet of paper, have them fold it once the long way, and then twice the short way. Right? And now you have a piece of paper that is subdivided into 8 sections. This is obviously not the correct dimensions, but like whatever, it's fine. Right? So here we've got 8 sections, and then you just say, again, depending on what you're doing, use a section, one section, in order to, you know, do today's notes, or you say, okay, use 2, 3, 4 boxes, whatever you end up needing in order to in order to block off whole sections of, you know, a topic or a particular day or whatever it needs to be. Give them the space to be able to do that, but at the same time say, like, hey, this is going to be, you know, the entire unit is going to be just that one page front and back, or you're trying to minimize the amount of space that you're using for any one of these so that you don't end up, you know, making yourself anxious. Okay, use graphic organizers. Have students collaboratively figure out what to write to their future forgetful selves. Okay, emphasize. The importance of worked examples. Right? Give choices of vetted problems that are going to not potentially confuse the students or give them too much information or not enough information on how to solve. Correct and annotate incorrect problems. And annotate. Whatever. I already did it on the previous one. It's fine. Give tasks 3 weeks later. To test their notes and see whether they are meaningful. Okay. All right, some questions to think about. What are some things in this chapter that feel immediately correct? This one's a little more difficult, I think, maybe to relate immediately to things, but everybody is aware that students have a hard time taking notes or that they're just mindlessly copying stuff. So how can we get students to actually think about it, do more mindful notes, right? Make sense, make students think about it rather than make students think about it rather than just doing it out of habit. That kind of tends to be the entire premise of the book, is stop making kids do stuff by habit and get them out of their comfort zone to do something different and more meaningful and more intentional. Which of your students do you think will have an easy time doing meaningful notes, and which need more support? Which people will just not do them at all? I think that students who are either overconfident or just completely on the slacking part of the pie chart won't do notes at all. So it's kind of the complete opposite ends of the spectrum, although not necessarily on like a knowing scale, but rather on the confidence scale. The ones who have given up and because they just know that they aren't good enough, the ones who are completely unconfident in everything, and the ones who are completely overconfident in their own abilities. I remember everything. I don't need to do this at all. Which students need more support? Probably those with hard time with like doing meta-analysis, so trying to figure out their own personal understanding, and people who are generally speaking just inexperienced at either taking notes or inexperienced in thinking in this way. I think is probably going to throw some of those students off a bit. Who's going to have an easy time with meaningful notes? Again, people who have already been doing that. I mean, he said it himself a couple of paragraphs ago, right? It's just like the students who already were doing this stuff are having the easiest time transitioning because they've already been doing it. Which graphic organizer, if any, do you think would be best for your students? My students at a community college, I would think a blank, the blank graphic organizer type 1, I think, right? The blank one, because it gives them the most choice in terms of what to put and where. I think some of the other ones may be interpreted by the students to be perhaps coddling a little bit, and I think that some of them would be rather resentful, especially if it was at like a calculus level. Alternately, there would be some calculus students who would be very thankful in terms of like having structure and saying like, okay, we're using this section today, it's on this particular topic. How do you feel about the fact that if you try to manage meaningful notes, students will need to do them for the wrong, or will start to do them for the wrong reason? So the reinforcement check in 3 weeks, I think, is really super important. And I found it very interesting, but it echoes all the previous sections that we were talking about before. If students are forced to do something, then they'll do it for the wrong reason. It happens throughout every single class that I've seen, really. If we just start, thinking back to when I first started teaching, students are doing things for the wrong reason all the time. And why should taking notes be any different? Think of a time where you yourself took I write, you write, and or fill in the blank notes. How engaged were you? I was pretty engaged, generally speaking, because I could both listen and write at the same time and leave enough space in my head so that it was like, okay, well, I don't need to write everything. I just need to write more or less what the teacher is talking about. And like the individual problem was actually super easy for me to figure out and copy down. These days I just take a picture of the board and like correspond that to my notes afterward. But there were some classes where I definitely drifted off the line. What are some challenges you anticipate you will experience in implementing the strategies suggested in this chapter, and what are some ways to overcome this? I mean, if you find out, let me know. Making sure we have enough time is always an issue for me, but that's just me. Yeah. Alright, here are some multi-step solutions and solution pathways on thinking tasks. K through 5, dot patterns. Considering the following dot patterns, this is a diamond, or really it's a square turned vertically, or, whatever, diagonal vertically. There are 25 dots. Find multiple ways to show that there are 25 dots by circling pieces of it and writing the appropriate number sentence. So in this case, this is a partitioning problem. How are you partitioning the 25 dots? And how many different ways can you do that? So writing the appropriate number sentence, in this particular case, they did 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 9. Which is also 4 times 4, because there are 4 triangles that they made with 4 dots each in them, and then plus 3 by 3, which is the square in the middle. Grades 6 through 9, 1,001 pennies. There are 1,001 pennies lined up on a table. Starting at one end of the line, I replace every second coin with a nickel. I then go back to the beginning and replace every third coin with a dime. Finally, I go back and replace every fourth coin with a quarter. How much money is now on the table? Oh no. Grades 10 through 12, Bank Robber. A bank robber is being chased by a bank guard when they fall into a square swimming pool. The bank robber. By the time the guard gets to the corner of the pool, the robber has swum to the exact middle. The guard can run faster than the robber can swim, but the robber can run faster than the guard can. What direction should the bank robber swim in a straight line, to maximize their chance of escape? Right, so the guard is on a corner, the robber is in the middle. And in what direction should the bank robber swim in a straight line to maximize their chance of escape? Alright, next week, Chapter 12, what we choose to evaluate in a thinking classroom. So what is it that we're going to actually start essentially grading without using the word grading yet? So this is going to be where we start getting into some of the more interesting problems that I had. If you all would be interested, we have our YouTube channels, which are at Obi-Wan-Pez for our gaming type stuff, and at NSimplexPachinko6542 for all of our mathematical content. So if you want to, please follow one or both of those channels, and all of our content will eventually be put up there. We're still currently working through about mid-August right now. So I'm uploading, generally speaking, a few a week, and I'm trying to get them so that it's basically like one or two a day, depending on how much content we have. So we'll see if we can get it up to current. I have a little bit of time tomorrow. We'll figure it out. And if anyone is interested in Elite Dangerous, nope, not that one. This system is currently under threat of war, so if anybody is interested, Tashader Sector AG-O A6-0, not confusing at all, is currently entering a war state, so keep an eye out, and we'll be moving to correct that soon. Okay. We are going to go and see, who do we have? Dr. Gold is on, and so we'll go over and see him. He's currently working on, looks like the quadratic equation. Not sure exactly what context he's working from at this exact moment in time. Looks like it's maybe differential equations. So, looks like it could be fun. I will be back tomorrow to do some Tai Chi Kitty with 9 souls. We're working on a couple of new areas. We'll see how that goes. We'll be back on Wednesday for more calculation type math and probably some of the GRE stuff. If you're at all interested, please come by, and come by with questions if you have any. And then on Friday, we'll be back for Against the Storm. And next Sunday, we'll be back for Satisfactory. And then next Monday, we're back with Peter Liljedahl to do more of his book. So, we'll see you all later. My name's Obi-Wan Pez. This is N Simplex Pachinko. Catch you next time.